our session. Certainly are glad you were able to join us for session 2 of our Lessons Learned from Quarantine series. And as you have no doubt have noticed, our chat is very active, as we like to do when we run these sorts of sessions to get you engaged. We have about an hour together. I do just want to throw out a few of the highlights from the chat, some of the themes that have been cropping up from our chat question here. What is the more challenging in a digital learning environment, deciding what to teach, deciding how to teach it, or measuring student mastery. And certainly that's different for all of us. We certainly have the measuring mastery theme that keeps cropping up in the chat. And that's certainly something that, you know, we probably would have preferred a different sort of training, but it's the training we had, and we're still kind of figuring out how this classroom experience is going to work, even moving into the next school year. And we talked a little bit about yesterday about capturing that teachable moment that we're living through the past 3 months. We've really had to adapt and get used to a new sort of classroom experience, and then planning for next year, even though we still may not know all the details. Some districts are going to look different than others, so we're all in a different place, but kind of figuring out what does that mean for us. So measuring student mastery or deciding how to teach, and that's really going to be a little bit of our focus today, is we're going to talk a little bit about how to separate what we're teaching from how we're teaching it. So with that being said, we'll go ahead and dive right into the content. And for those of you who were here yesterday, I'm glad you were able to join us today. My name is Michael Corey, and I'm a curriculum consultant with the Educational Service Center of Northeast Ohio. And I'll let my colleague Jennifer introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. I, too, am a consultant with the ESC of Northeast Ohio. You know, I was on the session yesterday, and so glad to see so many faces that we saw yesterday. And I'm just hoping that you can really get a lot out of this session, too.
Okay, so with that being said, we'll dive in. This is going to be the same poll from yesterday, so I'm going to put it up here in a moment. Again, I just like to get a sense. We don't always have the same exact population in each session, so I just want to make sure that we get a sense as far as who's in the room with us today. So if you wouldn't mind just sharing with us what sort of building assignment, what grade levels do you currently serve? Every district's a bit different, so just pick the one that you think's best as far as the grade levels that you serve. Helps us to get a sense as far as who our audience is, and then and then sort of how we can kind of gear some of our examples. And so I'm going to go ahead and shut the polling down here because it looks like most of us have answered. So, and then I'll go ahead and share the results. It looks like we have about half of us, maybe a little bit more than half of us are 7, 8, 9 through 12. So we have some middle school, high school folks. Certainly a shout out to the high school people. I was a high school guy myself, both as an administrator and as a teacher. I was administrator of middle school also for a short time. So, certainly glad you're with us, but certainly a lot of what we have to say will apply pre-K all the way up through the 12th grade. So I'm glad that you're here with us. And with that being said, we'll go ahead and move forward.
Okay, so today's session outcomes, our outcomes today are: what do you want students to learn, and how do you know that they have learned it? The big thing for us today is to look at it in a blended learning environment, because it really looks like that no matter if we are face-to-face in some capacity next year, that from the things I've read and the administrators I've talked to, that digital piece is still going to be there. So we have to be able to really look at and be reflective and be very intentional with what we are asking our students to learn and how we're asking them to learn it.
So with that being said, and this is, again, we bring these up with all of our sessions just to make sure that we all are on the same page. I'm not going to read them to you, but we're certainly glad you were able to join us in this sort of a format where we can see each other's faces, and then we can collaborate through the chat, through the polling, and then certainly an opportunity at the end. If you have any questions, Jennifer and I will stick around for any questions or comments that you may have. Certainly you have your little emotes that are reactions at the bottom of your screen. You can make use of those. Utilize your camera whenever possible. It's great to see your smiling faces. And then if you're mute your mic if you're not speaking. And I always share the example of my 3-year-old who busted into the room that happened again this morning. So I've got to really fix the lock on the door. And then, of course, use the chat to ask questions. We really try to stay on top of that. It's a way we can connect with each other. So with that being said, and the reason we show these is not necessarily for us right now, even though it does apply. And it's really just a reminder that when you're running synchronous sessions, and if you remember from yesterday, our synchronous communication, when you're running those, it's good to have norms. And if you want to adjust these or change them to suit your needs, certainly do that for whatever population you happen to be working with. And maybe it's with students, maybe it's with parents, maybe it's with colleagues, whatever the case might be. Feel free to adjust those. It's just the idea that we have some sort of standards for communicating in this way, because it is unfamiliar. And we probably are a little bit exhausted with our Zoom sessions. So with that being said, I just want to kind of frame our minds around the outcomes that Jennifer talked about. And if you can think for a moment about flying in an airplane, even though we're probably not doing a whole lot of that now, but in the past, imagine for a moment that we are on an airplane. You are trusting that the pilot has in their mind where they happen to be going, right? And if you're lucky enough to go on some sort of vacation, maybe to the Caribbean or someplace, you have an idea in your mind as far as what does it look like when you get there. So if you board the plane and you fully expect to fly to the Bahamas, and you get out and you see the Rocky Mountains, you've probably taken a wrong turn or have some sort of layover. So what we're talking about now with respect to the classroom environment is when we talk about really kind of a duality, we're going to talk about what it is that we're teaching, and we're going to talk about what does it mean to get there. And so those are really going to be kind of two sides of the same coin. And then in order for us to really make the most of a blended learning environment, we want to make sure that we have a really clear sense on our end. What am I teaching, and how does it look like? What does it look like when I get there? So that way I can very clearly communicate that with my students. And by extension, our parents, right? We talked yesterday about how parents are really in a new way involved in the classroom that they haven't been before. And that can be a tremendous support, but we have to be very clear, and that's important. So as teachers, how do we get there? How do we get our students to that place where, yes, they've learned it? And then how do I know how to communicate that in a way that makes sense?
Well, we're definitely going to do this by prioritizing our instruction. And throughout this whole process that you've been through this spring with this new type of learning and kind of being thrown into the fire, it might have been revealed to you just how different the activity is versus what the actual learning is for the students, and they're not one and the same. So there's a clear divide between what I'm asking them to learn and then what the activity is to get to that learning. And so again, like I said, we have to make sure that we're being very reflective and that we are being very intentional when we're planning. And we're going to do all this through our learning intentions and our success criteria. Typically, when we ask, or when we are thinking of lessons and things, it's what do I want them to do? And that really should be come after we ask ourselves, what do I want them to learn? The doing part, students can easily tell you what they're doing. They're doing this worksheet, or they're creating this story, but what is it that they are learning is what is so important, that we have to be very clear with the students when we are planning our lessons. So our learning intention today is that you will develop an understanding of learning intentions and success criteria as they apply to your distance learning or your blended learning environments. So, again, we're going to help you see the difference between what a learning intention is and then what that context of learning, or that success criteria is to get to that learning. Learning intention. So we'll start off with what exactly is a learning intention. And, I think there's many names for a learning intention, but I think for us, a learning intention is just explicitly describes what students should know, what they need to understand, and what they need to be able to do as a result of our learning and our teaching, that context of learning. So we need to be able to apply this to our digital classroom, because again, even though you might be face-to-face in some capacity, whether that's on an A-B schedule or some kind of face-to-face where they'll actually be in a building, you still are going to have to do some sort of digital environment.
So John Hattie and we talked a little bit about what learning intentions are, and really this gets wrapped up in the bigger umbrella called teacher clarity. And as the name suggests, it's the teacher being clear on what is being learned and how we know that the student has learned it. And the clarity has really two different dimensions to it. The first dimension is that you, the teacher, are clear on what it is you want students to learn. The second element is communicating what you want students to learn to the students, and now by extension the parents, right? So when we're talking about teacher clarity as a whole, John Hattie in his work, he has a pretty famous book called Visible Learning, and in that he studies a variety of different educational strategies, and he measures how effective those strategies are at actually moving the needle when it comes to student achievement. And one of the things that we want to measure when we measure things like effect size is we want to separate out what are those educational strategies that have the effect they're supposed to have versus what educational strategies really don't have any effect, and anything that happens is more attributable to some other factor or perhaps random chance. And there are even some strategies that move students backward, and we want to avoid those. Those are called reverse effects. When it comes to teacher clarity, as you can see on our nifty little graphic here, it has an effect size of 0.75. Anything above 0.4 is really in that zone that's saying, yes, this is having the effect that we want it to have. It is positively affecting student achievement. And so being clear, and so when we say teacher clarity, what we're talking about are the elements of today's session and tomorrow's session, where we talk about what do I want students to learn, how do I know they've learned it, and then tomorrow with Chris and Kelly, they're going to talk about assessment, we're going to talk about feedback. So those elements wrapped up together as a package make teacher clarity, and teacher clarity from a data standpoint does have a very positive effect on student achievement. Now, when we talk about learning intentions, so the learning intention is really stating clearly what the teacher wants students to know, understand, or be able to do as a result of the learning and teaching. Now, one of the things you're going to hear us say over and over and over again, and it almost seems like, oh, I knew that, but we really want to be reflective about, okay, how do I know that in context of what I'm doing in the blended classroom? Is that we want to separate what am I intending students to learn versus what do I want them to do. And we separated this out a little bit yesterday. I planted that little bit of a seed yesterday. We're going to flesh it out in some more detail now. But as I mentioned, if you recall, if you were in yesterday's session, I talked about the dining room table test, right? If you're sitting around the dining room table and this family's having a meal and mom and dad say, what did you learn in school today? Or what did you learn in math today? Is the student going to say, well, I learned how to add and subtract two-digit numbers? Or are they going to say, we did a worksheet? And you can really see there's a difference, right? That there's a difference between learning how to do the subtraction and then learning how to, or actually just physically doing a worksheet. And it's not that the student may have been learning how to subtract in both cases, but is the student really clear on what you are meaning to teach or what they were intended to learn as a result of doing a worksheet? So a strong learning intention. So this is I mean, it takes a little bit of time to be reflective and to be intentional. And one of the things that we've learned in this at-home learning experience is that not everything in the traditional classroom translates automatically to a blended environment, right? And so maybe some of the activities early on, maybe you tried to just transfer those activities wholesale right over to a digital environment. And maybe they worked, but maybe they didn't. Because we really begin to think about, okay, if this activity is not working, what other alternative activity can I do? What other type of thing or task can a student do to achieve the same result? So in order to really be able to plug and play with the activity the way that we really need to, we have to have strong learning intentions. So strong learning intentions have these elements to them. And every learning intention is a little bit different. And like Jennifer mentioned a few moments ago, in education, we have similar ideas that get kind of reiterated from time to time. So you can think about this like a learning objective or like a learning target, but a learning intention, a strong one, will include these elements. It will include what knowledge, skill, or understanding you want a student to have. It will include specific and observable verbs. It's brief and concise. We're not rewriting standards here, because standards are long technical phrases that you, the teacher, know, but you have to turn that into something the student can understand. You use student-friendly language. Again, in order for teacher clarity to have the effect that John Hattie researched, it needs to be something that the student becomes clear on. So if you have a learning intention that doesn't really click with what the student's understanding is, it's not going to have the same effect. Also, it needs to be stated from the student's perspective, because we're marrying two ideas today. We're marrying learning intention with success criteria. We'll talk about the success criteria soon. But in order for those two things to really join together and be a cohesive idea, you have to state it from the student's perspective, so they know, okay, this is what I'm learning, and then they can immediately connect that with, okay, I can do this, which is a set of criteria. That's how I know that I've learned it. And we also, in the learning intention, will include some element of what's to be demonstrated. Ideally, if the observer asks the student in the class, hey, what are you learning? They'll be able to explain what they're trying to learn and then why it's important, or why are they learning it. I mentioned yesterday very briefly, if I walk into a classroom and say, what are you doing? Or what are you learning today? And the student says, well, I'm doing a worksheet. That doesn't mean the student's necessarily wrong, but that's not really what they're learning, right? That's what they're doing. Ideally, in a perfect world, you would say, well, I'm learning how to subtract numbers by doing this worksheet. That they could separate the difference. They know what the learning is as apart from what the learning intention happens to be. And then the activities that surround that learning intention, that is really what we're focusing on, is how can you change those activities to meet that learning intention? Because no matter what environment you're in, I talked yesterday, someone mentioned in the chat, brick to click, right? There's always these phrases, and that one happens to rhyme, and I like things that rhyme. But if we're in a classroom or if we're online, whatever the scenario we happen to be in, we should be able to have an ironclad learning intention. Because when they're done with my class, when they're done with my social studies, or they're done with this English or this ELA assignment, what they're supposed to learn doesn't change, right? They still have to learn the same things, but they do that differently depending on the environment. But you have to have clarity on which is which in order to be effective with that.
So earlier I had brought up the term context for learning, and this is something that even when I taught, I would have to say I found myself kind of falling into, because the context for learning is like the activity or the project or that experiment that we've always done, and the kids just absolutely love it. But the problem is that if you were to ask your students what they are learning, they most likely would tell you what they are doing. And I'd like to also throw in that if some kids are having a hard time focusing, or they seem like they're not engaged, that's probably where we need to maybe step back and take a look at our learning intention and make sure that it's clear to them, what's clear that we want them to learn, because it might not be clear to them, so that's why they're not paying attention, or they're digging in their book bag, or they're doing everything but trying to do what we're asking them to do. And so we just need to be very careful that it's really easy to think of really cool things, because we have Teacher Pay Teacher and Pinterest and all that stuff that have all these amazing things that are colorful and fun, but we have to make sure that these activity based approaches, that our learning intention is still there, that the learning part is separate from the activity, and that our students really are clear with what they are going to be learning by doing those fun activities we found on Teacher Pay Teacher or Pinterest. This chart was very kind of, it opened up a lot for me, like, and it's showing how just different the two are. Because I know for sure when I taught, I definitely was probably very confusing to my students. I probably fell in that first column because I kind of merged them both together. I merged the learning intention with the context for learning, and I wasn't real clear and concise. So like the first one, to be able to write instructions on how to change a bicycle tire. A better learning intention, the concise, that, you know, it's clear, is to be able to write clear instructions. Now, whether I am in the building or whether I am doing remote learning, this is a very clear learning intention for my students. So maybe if I'm in that blended environment and I'm seeing some of my students face-to-face that day, some of them are going to be online, the context for learning is the part that could possibly change. But my learning intention, it's like Michael said, it is firm, it is clear and concise. So my context for learning would be changing a bicycle tire, like write instructions for that. But that could change. Maybe I would have them write clear instructions for how to do a flip grid, you know, how to put that on, you know, so their other peers could learn how to do Flipgrid. So really, the middle column is definitely where we want to be. I think, again, myself, I definitely was in that first column, but we need to understand that that context of learning is where that can be ever changing. That could change, and just based on even the platform that we're using, the format that we're using, digital or face-to-face. And then, Michael, did you want to add anything to
Well,
that?
yeah, I mean, I would just add to that. I mean, just like Jennifer said, when we're talking about the context of learning, that shifts upon the environment. And sometimes, and I know this is a tendency, when you find a really good context for learning, you just really want to stick with it because you know it works. I did this activity and I did it this way, and the kids really got into it, and they really showed a lot of growth. And so there are some contexts that we fall in love with sometimes, but we have to be very careful not to confuse that with what they're learning. So for example, if I could throw out, if let's say I think I used this example yesterday as well in the last session. If we talk about, like, for example, the book To Kill a Mockingbird, you know, if we want to identify the main characters and what their roles, what functions they play in To Kill a Mockingbird, that's great, but that's not the learning intention, really. If we want to identify characters and you know, maybe character traits, that's really the learning intention. To Kill a Mockingbird can change. We can change to a different story. We can have them. So when we separate the context from the learning intention, it helps us to stay grounded in what it is we're supposed to be having students do. So that way, when we switch to a blended learning environment, when you go from brick to click, you're going from the classroom to the blended environment. When you make that change, you're more readily able to do that because you already have separated in your mind, okay, here's my learning intention, and now here's how I'm going to do that. And how I'm going to do that, okay, well, you know, I had that one class where I had students get together and they were able to work together in groups, and then they came back and they debated, and you know, we had a great class discussion. Well, that may not be as feasible. So if we separate the activity out from what we're actually trying to teach, we're more able to be to adapt much more quickly. And it's going to be difficult at first. Of course, that's true. Of course, right? Because we're doing something new. But the more we do something new, just like when you were a first-year teacher, you know, you begin to build a library of activities. And those activities are separated from the learning intention, and therefore they become much more versatile.
Yes. So when we talk about high quality learning intentions, the biggest thing about a learning intention, once they've learned it, is it transferable? Can you take that last column of that chart, that context for learning, and if you change that up, are they able to apply that new learning to something that's very similar, or maybe a little bit different context? And that's a great way for you to be able to assess how deeply they learned what it was that you needed them to learn. Another big thing with learning intentions is it helps to differentiate instruction. Students are not working towards different goals. You have that clear learning intention there in that center column, and everyone is working towards that, but maybe their context of learning might be a little bit different, but they're still working towards that same high quality learning intention. And so when setting these intentions, it is so important, like Michael and I have said since the beginning, that there is a clear distinction between what students will do, so that context for learning. And again, I just keep thinking of that chart. So that last column, what will they do in the lesson and what will they learn, that middle section. And when we're thinking of this digitally or remotely, that's where I know Michael brought up the words synchronous and asynchronous. It's very important if we are not doing a lot of synchronous communication. If we're doing asynchronous, where we're videotaping ourselves, and so things aren't happening in real time, that learning intention has to be very clear, not only for the student, but remember the parent. It's very important for the parent because they have a huge role in this now also.
So, and to kind of continue on with that, when we actually go to create our learning intentions, we want to think about those learning objectives, which is another phrase that we use pretty common. And we want to start it with something like "to be able to," which is this is not necessarily groundbreaking information, but it helps us to frame the conversation that we want students to put it into a verb format, right? Because we want to know what students, we want to identify what we want students to know and we want them to do. So to start off your learning intention with "to be able to" is a very simple yet effective way ensuring that your objective is really a learning objective and not a particular activity. I'll add on this, and perhaps you've experienced this over the past few months, is that when you have an assignment and you've assigned it, it's on Google Classroom, Schoology, or whatever your platform happens to be, maybe you've had some questions coming from parents. What are we really supposed to be doing here? I really don't understand what's going on. I don't really know what is my son or daughter, what are they going to gain from this? I don't get the point. When we're very clear up front that this is what we're learning and this is what we're doing, it helps to alleviate a little bit of that confusion up front. And remember, when we're talking about what we're learning versus what we're doing, one question you might be asking yourself is, well, how do students know this? Well, they know that because we tell them. And we tell them again, and we tell them again. And if you've been a teacher for like 5 minutes, you know you have to tell students like 12 times because they just don't remember stuff, right? And so when you're a teacher, and I do it, sometimes I do it like with my friends, and they find it annoying. I just find myself repeating the same thing, right? Because that's just in my DNA now. We tell them, and then we retell them, and we retell them as a reminder, and you say it again and again and again. This is what we're learning. This is what we're doing to achieve that learning. And students of all age groups can access that sort of information, right? Because we're saying those learning intentions in language that the students can understand. So if you cannot start something with "to be able to," for example, there's some stems here on these next few slides. I'm not going to read them all to you. They're really here just for your resource. But we want to look at things like, to know or to develop or to understand or to be aware of. Now, one thing I will very much caution you with is that when you're creating a learning intention, you should be thinking about, how will I measure this? So if I say I want students to know X, Y, Z, how do you know that they know that? To know something is very much an internal experience, right? Knowledge is something that exists in the brain. So you have to think, okay, how will they demonstrate that? And then we'll talk about that with success criteria here shortly. But when you're creating that learning intention and you're going to have, I want students to know or to understand this thing, you should always at the same time be thinking in the back of your mind, okay, if I'm going to tell them I want them to understand something, I should also be thinking about, how will I know they understand it? Because how in the world are you going to measure, right? I mean, there's no way to know if they understand that thing that you're trying to get them to. So when we talk about creating learning intentions, we're also kind of talking about level of challenge, right? We want to make sure that or we want to be considerate of the challenge that goes into the learning intention, and we don't want to compound any one lesson or any one learning experience with too many learning intentions. We also don't want it to be, I want students to know this, and I want them to know this, and I want them to know this, where it's very much fact-based. And if you've done any work with depth of knowledge, you know that there's different levels of knowing, right? There's different levels of cognitive demand. And when we talk about just that knowledge level, that DOK level 1, that's good. You need that. You can't do DOK level 2 or DOK level 3 without that level 1 knowledge. But be cognizant of what level of knowledge, what DOK level are you asking of students in a given learning intention? And one learning intention may last you a day or 2 days or a week, depending on the type of learning intention that it is. But just be cognizant of that, so that way you're not compounding too much and too much cognitive demand, or maybe just too many fact-based learning intentions in a given lesson. So with that being said, I put some things here for some reference for you, something you can refer back to. And after this session is over, you will get a copy of this slide deck as well as a recording. And I'm not sure if you received yesterday's recording, because it's a 3-session series, so you may be getting it at the end of tomorrow's session. We'll send out all the recordings and all the slide decks and all the resources, so you'll have that. But when we talk about knowledge, right, we're talking about, here's some examples, right? Know about, or know how, or why, or what. We're talking about skills. We're talking about, okay, can you write this, or can you solve this, or can you identify this, or can you experiment with this? Again, when we're creating the learning intention, we're thinking about what does it look like to have done that thing. But these are some sample ideas that you can put together to help you draft those learning intentions. Understanding, here's some examples of what that means, right? What does it mean to know, to understand the causes of the historical events? Let's say you're studying the American Revolution. So what were the causes of the American Revolution, right? So if you want students to understand that, that's fine, and you can state that very clearly, but also be thinking to yourself, how will they demonstrate that they know that? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to throw out another poll here. Just to kind of get a sense as far as where you are with respect to learning intentions, especially when contrasted with activities. So would you say that you've already mastered this? Like, yeah, Michael and Jennifer, I got this. Don't worry. As a matter of fact, if you guys want to take a break, I'll go ahead and take over. I won't make you do that. But maybe you are at that level, and that's terrific. Maybe you have a good grasp, still working through some of the differences. Maybe you have a fairly good idea, but you're still kind of working through it. Maybe you're kind of struggling to differentiate between the two, or maybe you really don't know what a learning intention is as opposed to a learning activity. So I'm going to give you just a few more seconds here to complete the poll. And I'm going to go ahead and bring the polling to a close here in 3, 2, 1, maybe a -1, 0. I don't know, I'm kind of bouncing. I'm seeing the number go up, so I want to make sure I give everybody time. Okay, there we go. Go ahead and share the results. So we have a master in the room. It's all anonymous, so I don't know who you are, but I'm glad you're here. And then we have most of us are like having a good grasp. Some have a fairly good idea. Some are still kind of struggling to differentiate the two. And we're all, learning is a continuum, right? I mean, it's a process. And I think we've sort of had a trial by fire here the past few months to kind of figure out. But I think that one really great idea to pull from this past experience is say, okay, I really need to learn how to separate these two. So hopefully that's helped to move the ball down the field somewhat. And
Okay, so
chat box question. I'm sorry, I'm looking at a different screen here to keep my notes in front of me. So given the level of uncertainty for next, I muted myself. Given the level of uncertainty for next school year, what do you think is the value in separating learning intentions from learning activities in the lesson planning process? So especially, and let me give some more context for that. You don't know exactly 100%, you're not 100% sure what you're walking into next year, right? Is it going to be all traditional brick and mortar? Is it going to be 100% online? Is it going to be a mixture of the two? Are you going to see some of your students on Monday and Tuesday and others on Wednesday and Thursday, and it's all digital Friday? Whatever the scenario is, what do you think is going to be the value in separating those two ideas from one another? And I will just throw out, anytime we do a chat box question, it's not that we have to, comprehensively discuss all of it before we move on. This is something that can continue on in the chat because that way we continue having that conversation while we still hit some content.
Okay, so while, am I up here?
This is you.
Sorry, go ahead. Okay. No, so we're going to move into the success criteria, but as we're moving into this, the big takeaway, I think, for the learning intentions is that, again, you might not have that student sitting in front of you, and they can't ask you the questions about that learning intention for the day. So that's why it needs to be very clear what it is you're asking them to learn, and then what it is you're asking them to do, because it may be mom, dad, grandma, aunt, uncle, brother, sister that's sitting down to help them, and they're reading this learning intention, or they're or walking through this lesson. So you want to make sure that it's very, very clear what it is that you're asking them to do. So now that we have that learning intention, and you know, it's a great learning intention, we're going to move into define what is success criteria. How do I know that my students have learned what I wanted them to learn? So our success criteria is just a way for you as a teacher to measure your students' progress, and it's a way for students to monitor their own learning. So as they're going through the process, going through the learning that you're asking them to do. Our success criteria, they need to be very specific. They, you know, whether it's a checklist, it needs to be concrete. A lot of kids, especially in a digital environment, having that that checklist there, so they know, hey, I did this, I'm moving on to this. Your success criteria describes what success looks like when the learning goal is reached. So you give them examples. You give them examples of what it looks like at the end. You know, a lot of times, I know at least when I taught, I was very apprehensive about giving them and showing them this is what it looks like at the end, but there really should be no mystery. This takes the mystery out of the learning, and you know, having that end result and seeing what it's supposed to look like at the end is very important for our students, especially in a digital environment. And then it must be measurable too. Success criteria, it helps our students plan, and it helps them predict, and it helps them set goals, and it helps them, again, like we said, it helps them judge their progress. And we're going to show a video here very shortly of Sarah, and you will see how we can help our students as they progress through to get to that goal for our learning intention. Provide students with the opportunity to assess their own learning. You know, where am I at in this continuum here? It increases their motivation. You know, they want to get to that end result, that example that you showed them, the non-examples, the things like that that we worked through, and alleviates a lot of anxiety. If I know and you're clear with what it is I need to learn, then this is what it should look like whenever I'm done, then okay, if mine's starting to look like that, then I know I'm on the right path. I know where I'm going.
And I could just add to that, Jennifer. I mean, just with the anxiety piece, you know, and maybe if especially if you have children of your own that are going through this experience right now, or they've ever been in an online class, or if you've ever taken an online class before, you know, there can be some anxiety that builds up because you don't like, am I doing this right? Or is this really what this is supposed to do? Or did I really make progress? When we're clear on what that success criteria, when we're clear on what those are, it helps that student to self-monitor. And in the case of our younger students, have a lot more parental support, or maybe some other adult that's there helping them along, it helps that adult to also know, okay, yes, you know, this student's making progress, or okay, yeah, okay, this is kind of what it's supposed to look like. So, you know, if you don't, absent clear success criteria, there's some level of anxiousness that can build up on behalf of the student, and we really want to be able to alleviate that as much as possible.
Right, so the video that we're going to show is Sarah. She is a kindergarten. I'm sure she's probably a little older now, but when watching this video, it's really just to show you the progression and how Sarah is monitoring her own learning, and because she sees the criteria that she needs to do to reach that end result. And whether you teach pre-K, 6th grade, 12th grade English, it doesn't matter. This is definitely just a great example of what we can do to help with success criteria.
Sarah, can you tell us how this chart works? We'll point to them and tell us about it.
I know nobody's on this, but some people might not be on this.
How come?
Because some people won't do that because we're in kindergarten, but some people might do that.
Good. Now go further up the chart and tell us about the middle of it, Sarah, around the orange crayon.
Well, some people sound it out and try and make their letters neat on this one.
Good. And what about further up the chart, Sarah? Then what happens?
On this one, they try to sound it out. They try to make their letters neatly and try to make the thing right. This is where I am. I sound it out. I try to keep them nicely written. I try to make the right words. I try to keep the letters with a space before they start. And I'm going over to here because it's the last step and I'm over at the 9 step. This is the 10 step.
Sarah, can you tell?
So I know the video skipped a little bit, but you can see how that progression of learning really helps Sarah and the teacher see their progress and set goals and things like that. So I know Sarah is just adorable, isn't she? But in the chat box, if you could, why would having Sarah's in the classroom be valuable, especially in the blended or digital learning environment? So if you could, write down why you think having a student like Sarah, hopefully you'd have more than Sarah, because if you're providing that step-by-step process for the students, then they can see where they're at in that writing process and what they need to work on, what they need to, how do they get to that next level.
And I would also add the reason we show an example. Sarah's in kindergarten, as you could probably imagine, and Rebecca mentioned that's a cuteness overload, and I completely agree. So if you're having a bad day, you are welcome. But when we talk about these sorts of examples, we show a kindergarten example to really emphasize the point this can happen at all grade levels. If it can happen in kindergarten, if a student in kindergarten can know what it is they're supposed to be learning, what does it look like to have learned that thing, and then of course, some of the comments that you're mentioning, it can happen at any grade level. So that's the reason we show such a young student. And I'll just call out some of the things that are going on in the chat as well. Where students are able to show where they are and where they're going. We have seeing how others progress makes it achievable for others. That's a really great point. Having the student be able to self-monitor, self-evaluate, know where she wants to go. And she was very articulate. I mean, she's obviously a very well-spoken little girl, but on top of that, she was able to articulate accurately, right? She was able to show, okay, what does each stage look like? So really some really great comments going on here in the chat. I just want to talk very briefly about different types of success criteria. And there are really two main types, at least in our hour-long session today, that we're going to talk about. The first is a product-based success criteria. So these are success criteria that focus on endpoints or checkpoints along the way. And this is really intended to get students to demonstrate how they've achieved the learning intention, right? So as the name suggests, they're producing some sort of product. Maybe that is, maybe a project that they can do, or maybe it's on some sort of assessment. They're able to demonstrate the learning. They can show you they've achieved the learning intention. And each subject area, each grade level might be a little bit different, but these are things the students are producing, and these are typically summative. They're typically at the end, or at least some sort of checkpoint, significant checkpoint along the way. They're not as particularly helpful during the learning. So if you can think about this as summative assessment, our next one is sort of along the lines of formative assessment. These are process-based types of success criteria. So it's sometimes difficult when you begin to say, okay, this is what it means, especially if it's something it's completely unknown to the student. It's very, very much different for them. So if you think about, okay, at the end of this learning in 2 weeks, this is what you're going to produce. Well, that's good. That's super, super important, but that's not helpful tomorrow. It's not helpful in 2 days from now, right? So we want to be able to show process-based, maybe a checklist, or maybe a step-by-step, or maybe here's what, the best example that I can think of right off the top of my head, at least makes it very vivid in my mind, is like in an art class. And you can watch in an art class the stages that a student goes through when they're completing a certain, maybe during a watercolor painting or something. And so this is, stage 1, stage 2. So if you're in stage 2, these are the things these are how you know you're on the right track. And it's enough information to allow the student to adjust, to compare where they are with where you are, or at least where the success criteria are. And it provides them a way to course correct. And they're not waiting until the end of the week, or they're not waiting to the end of 2 weeks or whatever that learning intention is, to know, okay, yes, I've achieved. Yes, I've mastered it. The process-based success criteria are more geared toward, all right, I'm on the right track, or I am making progress towards that end product.
So when we take a look at success criteria in our digital environment that we all are going to most likely continue into the next school year, some examples would be, definitely we talked about checklists. Video examples would be whether it's asynchronous, where it's you are explaining the concept and you've videotaped yourself, or it could be synchronous, where you are live and you are going over how to do something. The teaching channel, YouTube. There's a lot of great places that you can find examples for that would tie into what your learning intention is. And then the artifacts that you could put into the Google Classroom, because remember, when a student is on and doing a lesson through Google Classroom or whatever platform it is digitally, you want them to be able to go back and look at the artifacts, or look at what it is that you are asking them to do, whether it's your video, they can stop it, they can reflect, they can start it again. You want them to be able to do that, because again, you don't have that synchronous communication where they can ask you as they're going through it, I'm not sure how to do this. You need to be able to they need to be able to go back and look at the artifacts or the videos, things like that. So in the chat box, how do you communicate with students what is expected of them during their learning? How are you asking them, what's the ways that you are using, what platforms are you using to get them, to ask them what they're learning, is what I'd like for you to address in the chat box. This is an actual example of where this is it was in a Google Classroom, and the students were to watch this video, and as they're watching the video, they needed to take a few notes so that they would know how to, at the end result was they were going to have to write a paper, and within this video, it was good because you could stop and start it if you're taking notes, so you would know what the pieces were within the paper that you needed to write, what was the criteria, things like that. So I think it's important when you watch this, again, to know that this is a great way for your students to be able to see how they're going to reach that learning intention.
I'm missing some sound, so just bear with me. I have too many windows open, so. Oh, there we go.
Life at a particular time. We are living in a historic moment that you may want to share with a future generation 100 years from now. For this reason, you will create your own time capsule. You need to select one item that represents what kids your age are doing for fun when they're stuck at home. You need to select one item that says something about popular culture. It could relate to movies, video games, music, books, or television, but it has to be something that is popular right now. You need to select one item that people seem to cherish more during the quarantine than any other time before. You need to select one item that relates specifically to your family or your culture. And finally, you need to include some kind of documentation of daily life. It could be a to-do list or a daily schedule from home. It might be a receipt of something that you bought. It might be a journal entry sharing how you feel about this time. Keep in mind that your items need to last at least 100 years. They also need to say something about the present moment. The more specific and personal, the better. Now describe all 5 items for future generations. Include a few sentences about what each item is and why you chose it. Remember that they won't have the same background knowledge you have, so you'll need to be clear, specific, and descriptive in your explanations. Hey, if you enjoy this video, you might also
So in that example, of course, we don't necessarily have the animation skills to do that in our own classrooms, right? But how does something like that also translate maybe to a math classroom? So here I have, kind of to bring everything together into one package, here's an example from perhaps like maybe a 3rd or a 4th grade math classroom. And I have a learning intention, and I also have success criteria. So if we look at the learning intention together, we can see the learning intention says, I am learning how to compare fractions. Now, from a mathematical perspective, comparing fractions has a very specific meaning, right? We understand how to compare one fraction to another. We know what that means, that there's a definite meaning. However, the word compare in everyday language can mean a lot of different things, right? So to the everyday person who's looking at this, that maybe they're not in my math classroom, that could be a vague learning intention, right? So we are specific. It is, student friendly. And I have a 3rd grade daughter, or she's now finished 3rd grade, so I know that's an appropriate learning intention for her. But along with that, I have the success criteria. And what the success criteria do, they help to illuminate somewhat what that learning intention is about, right? So not only does it help to clarify the learning intention, it also helps the student to know, okay, yes, I can in fact do that thing because I have these success criteria to go with it. So for example, I can identify the numerator and denominator. I can draw a model to represent fractions. It can use inequality symbols to compare fractions. That helps to step out what exactly I mean when I say that I'm learning how to compare fractions. So here is a somewhat simplistic example, but I wanted to have something that was all on one page for you. Here's something else, is right out of a classroom, a bulletin board. I was never much of a bulletin board teacher, mostly because I'm not creative. But here's an example of a bulletin board where you have the success criteria for writing a successful advertisement, right? So we have a little nugget of a learning intention there at the top. And then how do I know that I've created a successful advertisement? It's a great learning intention. It has a meaning to it, but everybody's definition of success could be a little bit different, right? So how do I know that I've made progress towards this in your class? Well, you've told me that the picture hooks the audience. It's big and bold and colorful. You've told me the sentences are short, detailed, and to the point. You've told me the picture clearly describes and tells the main idea. You've told me that sentences have juicy words. You've told me the picture is appropriate for the audience. You told me the advertiser persuades the audience. Now, of course, during class time, when you're working through and you're teaching and you're having students work together, they're working through, okay, what do these success criteria look like? You provide them examples and you talk about what they mean. And what do you mean when you say this sentence has juicy words? Like, I don't understand what the meaning is behind that. So you're showing, so this is all kind of developing and coming and taking shape during the teaching process and the learning process and the student work process. But a student will know they've created a successful advertisement, which is your learning intention based on the standard, because they can do these things below. I know I've arrived. I have comfort because I know what these things are, and I have a landing spot that's been defined for me. And it alleviates any confusion that might arise because of that.
Right, so when you're planning success criteria, you just ask yourself these 3 questions, because the first one is, what will my students have learned? That's your learning intention, making sure that that is very clear, that it's in student-friendly language, that it does not include that learning context. you could ask yourself, how will they demonstrate what they've learned? That's that summative assessment at the end. How are we going to gauge that they have learned what it is that we wanted them to learn? And then how can I make it clear to students what good quality work will look like? And that's where we could provide examples. Anytime you can provide non-examples and have students explain why this is a non-example, that is huge for kids. That really shows you too that they understand what a good example is versus why is this a non-example. So anytime you can throw in those non-examples, that's great. Remember that the learning intention has to be linked to, or the success criteria needs to be linked to that learning intention. If it's not, then you're going to get those kids that aren't engaged, those kids that are confused and struggling and just frustrated. Parents are frustrated. You're getting multiple emails. You know, that too, having that clear learning intention and that, and knowing what they're doing to reach that learning intention will be huge for you too, because that would lessen the amount of times you have to repeat yourself. Success criteria should also be shared with the students, just like in Sarah's video, where it's right up on that bulletin board. If you're doing things digitally, then have that in your Google Classroom so that it's an artifact that they can go back to it and look at it, look at the steps to see if they are reaching their goals. It should be based on a learning intention, like I said before. It really shapes the teaching and the modeling that we're going to do. And that's where we need to be reflective and be intentional, and know that, whatever we're using to teach it, to model it, that again go hand in hand. And success criteria definitely provide the key focus for all feedback and assessment. And whether it's that formative assessment that Michael had talked about, or that summative assessment.
And one of the things I'll just add to that is that anytime you show success criteria, anytime you show examples, anytime you show non-examples, one tendency that's very common is that students will, if you show an example that has a cupcake and you say, well, don't use my example, then they'll come up with one that says a cookie instead of a cupcake, right? And in every other meaningful way, it's exactly what you show them. So it's going to take practice, it's going to take student exposure to success criteria, and it's going to take your constant encouragement to branch out on their own. So we want to show diverse examples that have different scenarios, if and when possible. And those counter examples, like Jennifer said, are so powerful. And you also ask the students, why is this a counterexample? You don't necessarily have to say everything up front, right? You show them either a counterexample or maybe a poor example, and you ask them to evaluate that. And that helps them to sharpen their own understanding. Okay, so I'm going to throw out the last poll. We're just about at the end of our session for today. This is going to be about success criteria. So I'm curious to know, where are you? Have you mastered this, right? Could you already teach others? Do you already have a good grasp? Do you have a fairly good idea? You're still discovering new ways to make this happen in a digital or blended in classroom. You're still struggling to understand what success criteria look like, or you really don't know what success looks like. So no right or wrong answers here, just getting a sense as far as where you are. And to give you some level of comfort, these 3 sessions, they're only an hour long. And typically when we do this sort of work, we're working together for, a day or 2 or 3 days. So, it really is compacted. So we're really just sort of whetting your appetite for more learning in this area. So I'm going to go ahead and shut down the polling and share the results. It looks like some of us have a fairly good idea. Most of us have a fairly good idea, still discovering some new ways for them to demonstrate success. And I'm going to guarantee that's going to continue, right? That's going to continue in the next school year, and you're going to build that library, and you're going to become more confident in how to have students demonstrate success and separate those activities sometimes from what was happening maybe in a brick and mortar environment. So we want to thank you for your time today. Jennifer and I will stick around here for a few minutes. If you have any questions or want to talk a little bit, that's great. If not, really, really glad you could join us today. I'm going to go ahead and bring this or the session to a close. If you would like to contact us, please feel free to reach out, send us an email. We'll do whatever we can to support you, and we wish you the best. Hope you have a terrific summer, and hope you're ready to go for next school year. Thank you, and have a terrific day.